What do you collect?
Currently, I think the thing that I collect the most is probably film and then books. Only recently have I started picking up action figures or toys or anything, in an attempt to reclaim some of the things from my past. Whereas, if I'm sitting in the Sanctum here, I can see you collect a little bit of everything.
And I think you and I collect a lot of the similar things. Like we both like film, and so I collect films as well too, like DVDs and Blu-rays of films that we enjoyed when we were kids, so we can sort of relive that the spirit of the neighborhood video store or something along those lines. Or that you just have a library, right? Like in the old days, you'd collect books to have a reference library of things to reference. And you and I do the same thing with films, with movies. You want to be able to go back to that film when you're thinking about it, or perhaps that scene, and obviously all this probably
right. And I think we're of that first generation that was able to, I think, collect. I mean, except for the old guys who collected books, right, classic literature, or
right,
or magazines or newspapers, whatever they were collecting, stamps. But media, like film, we were of that first generation, and I don't even think it started off as necessarily collecting, as just wanting to own certain things, certain favorite films. It's like, now it's mine. I can watch it anytime I want.
Right.
And I think that started with the advent of the VCR, being able to record. Maybe even before that, cassette tapes and stuff. But it really, for me, started. I didn't even think about it as building a collection per se, and I don't know if I've ever really thought of myself as a collector, though I would imagine anyone who met me for the first time and saw the things I have would call me a collector. But I'm nowhere on the level, let's say, of yourself. It was like just a serious collector.
The very first thing I can remember collecting is comic books. But everything I've ever collected has always stemmed from me enjoying it first. So as a kid, I would get comic books. I enjoyed reading them. And I would just keep them. Not in the reference that I was going to collect them, that I was, they were going to be worth money or anything like that. I just liked to have that storyline or those comic books. And then as I got older, I started to find out that there was a comic book price guide, and I would read that, and I would learn about all these comics that existed, because this is pre-internet days, so you had to learn about this stuff almost word of mouth. And I would look through the yellow pages. My dad would take me into Boston to his office, and I would look through the yellow pages, and I would just look up comic books, and I saw that there was actually a comic book store. And the comic book collecting started happening big in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of comic book stores started opening up in the 80s. And I remember the first time I walked into a comic book store and realized that I could get back issues of this stuff. And I think that really sparked the collecting mentality for me. Toys, not so much then, because I was still a kid when I was getting comic books.
Yeah.
So toys to me as a kid were just getting them to play with and to have and to enjoy.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after college that I started to be like, wow, there's a cool Mego figure. I remember having those as a kid. Maybe I should grab that. I like that. And then through the years, it just built up to stem to sort of a collecting that I wanted to reacquire some of these items.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about hardcore collectors like yourself is that there seems to be this desire for to be a completist. For instance, there's this line of comics that you like, and maybe you don't even like this particular run, this artist, this writer, but somehow you still need to have it.
Right.
And you need to have it complete, and then you need to have a copy that's pristine, and then one to read. And the same with, I think, a lot of the things, something that's mint in box, something that you can display. That I find truly fascinating, and I really think that's, call it what you want, but let's just say psychology of needing to have these items without. Well, again, that's just me making a judgment. My collecting is just I want a specific thing. Like, let's say, I'll use, for instance, the $6 Million Man action figure. That was something that I had. That was something I had as a child, and it was one of my favorite toys. So then when I finally reached a point where I had what I could call a disposable income and access to eBay, I looked to find the mintiest one I could find so that I could reclaim that thing. But I haven't, in turn, gone out and bought a lot more of that line.
Right.
Or all the variations like you have. I just wanted that one particular toy. But even then, I'm I think I collect it and then I forget about it, and I don't really go much further than that. And I think I have a lot more regret
Right.
when it comes to that stuff than maybe some other folks do. We've discussed the fact that I just don't even have anywhere to display this stuff at this stage of my life. So a lot of it's sitting in boxes.
Well, that's the bane of the collector too, is that you acquire so much that your collection gets ahead of you, and you're stuffing it in boxes, and people have storage facilities filled with comic books or toys or whatever that they don't even look at. So they buy the stuff and they never even see it. And I'm just as guilty of that as anybody else. I don't know. That's part of the zen and the peace for me is being able, to sit around and go through this stuff and to look at it and to view it. But I want to have it out for other people to see. So like when you come over here, you're always like, oh, hey, what's this piece here? What's that there? Kind of in a way of being a curator at a museum.
Right.
And some collectors treat their stuff that way as well. They rotate their collection. So they'll say, okay, for a couple of months I'm going to keep all my Frankensteins out. Then I'm going to put them away, and I'm going to bring out all my mummies and put them up somewhere. And you have a rotating display.
There was a period in my life when I was a kid up until my early teens when I just had probably all of the toys and action figures that I'd ever collected as a child.
Right.
All the Star Wars, all the, I shouldn't say all, but as much of the Star Wars set as I could have. I had the Masters of the Universe, and I was still collecting them and enjoying them probably well past the age that I should have. At least back then, it wasn't cool to be 13 and still have a lot of toys in your room.
Right.
Right. That things have changed a lot now. I mean, adults, it's full. You go to Target and it's mostly men who are looking at the toys, right? And they're looking at it to collect it for themselves. But anyway, so at about the age of 13, I divested myself of just about all my toys, right? So I might have kept one or two things, and then by the time I was in high school, they were long gone, locked away. College, forget about it. But I remember when I was in college, the Warren Beatty Dick Tracy movie came out. And I remember loving it. I had no intention of seeing it, but when it came out on video, I watched it and I loved it. And I loved the fact that it had Al Pacino playing, was it Big Boy Caprice?
Right.
And I remember one day, just for whatever reason, my girlfriend and I think we were waiting for a movie to start, and there was a KB Toys. We just went in to browse, and I saw that there was a line of action figures based on that movie.
Right.
And as a gag, I bought the Big Boy Caprice. But just to say, now I have, I was just going to display it on my desk or whatever. But as the days went by, it was like, I want that one too. And I want that one. And before I knew it, I had the whole collection.
Right.
And that was sort of like my first taste of collecting. I can remember KB was selling them. They were in the discount, the bargain bins, because it was a failed kind of toy line. It didn't catch on. But to get some of the other ones, I actually had to go to the Disney store, I think it was, or the Warner Brothers store. I don't remember what, and pay like top price.
Right.
Just so I could complete the collection, which I did. And that was sort of like my first taste of it. And then I don't think I really ever did anything like that again until fairly recently, where I just started collecting certain lines of action figures again. But just bits and pieces, like I have a 40th anniversary He-Man because I like the way he looked, but I'm not going to lose my mind and try to get the full line of those again, even though I probably could.
Right.
Just because I wouldn't know what to do with them at this point, right? I just, unless I was going to do a Sanctum episode on Masters of the Universe, but...
you did buy the 40th anniversary one, didn't you?
Yeah, well, the He-Man.
Yeah.
But I'm saying is I'm not going to buy the Skeletor, and I'm not going to buy the Beast-Man if they are available.
How are you not going to buy the monsters? Those are the ones that I would definitely buy. See, that's where they would get me.
Well, because
I had to have the monsters. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting that we're talking about He-Man, because to go back to what you just said, you and I are very similar circumstances. I was playing with toys, or at least buying toys well past the point that I should have been buying. I was 13 or 14.
Right.
And He-Man came out right around that time period. And I had rediscovered some of my toys in my closet or my attic. And I remember I found my Planet of the Apes treehouse, what was left of it, and I had built it together. and found some of my Planet of the Apes figures and was just displaying them in my room and stuff like that. And then I think it was out with my dad or something, and I came across the He-Man figures, and I was like, wow, this is like, it's like Conan the Barbarian type thing.
Sure.
So that's what appealed to me first of all. And then Skeletor was a skeleton. He was a monster. So I'm like, this is cool too. And I'd never seen any figure designed that way, that they were solid plastic with this weird bow-legged squatting position.
Right.
And, up until that time, everything was the 3 3/4 inch Star Wars toys.
Right.
And then, of course, G.I. Joe came out and made them a little bit more posable with more points of articulation. And I wound up buying He-Man and Skeletor. And I remember some friends came over my house and they were like, hey, what's this crap? Like, you still play with toys? And I was like, oh, no. I go, my grandma, she's kind of old. She doesn't remember how old I am, so she bought me these for my birthday. I was embarrassed. Now, I probably, if you look around here, everything's just proudly displayed.
Yeah.
But it's like, back then it was almost shameful same with comic books. It was shameful to be a comic book collector in a way. It was like, what? You read comic books? Come on, dude, you're in college. And then it started to get popular. Now, of course, you've got everybody involved in comic book toys, whatever. It's massive. It's its own industry. I mean, Target and Walmart has their own sections. It's just collectibles now.
Right.
Which is brand new stuff, which can't be collectibles per se. But like I said, they market this stuff. They know that there's a market out there for guys our age that want, just look at the Funko Pops, for crying out loud. You go in the store, they're everywhere. They're trying to generate making these collectible. And you're right, it dates back to when we were a kid, when you'd see it on the commercial. Collect them all, But my daughter was the same way. She loved Pokemon, or she loved Hatchimals or whatever. And now we've got buckets of those.
Right.
And in a way, sometimes I want to keep them because I'm like, maybe she'll be like me, and in college you'll be like, oh, I wish I had all my Hatchimals left,
Right.
And, but who knows,
Yeah, you can never tell, and that's sort of part of it. Is I think the collector is the person who, once they have the means, suddenly says, I want to go back and reclaim those things. I think if we had kept them all this time, we wouldn't be collectors, right? Or
right.
We'd be, but not in the way that we are now. It's about it's trying to go back in time, I think, in a way, to reclaim something of our innocence, something of a more special and innocent time.
Well, every action figure or comic book or anything from the past is its own little time machine in a way.
Yeah.
And that when you open it, or you smell that smell of the comic book pages, or you hold that figure in your hand, and you're like, oh my God, I remember holding this as a kid, or I remember that the hours I spent on my family room rug playing with this particular figure. And you talk about getting rekindled for collecting, and I remember I was, I go in and out of comic books, but I would always come back to them. And but toys, I would always go to Toys R Us and peruse the toy aisle and just go up and down and look at the toys and go, oh, that's cool, because I was always into that. Right. But I never bought anything. And then must have been around 92, 93, the Batman animated series came out. And I remember coming home drunk from a bar one night and stopping into a 7-Eleven or a Circle K or something along those lines, and they had some rack toys there. And they had a Batman animated series, and I have it right here. This is the exact figure of Two-Face. And I was like, oh my God, that thing is awesome. And I bought it. And I took it home. And then I found out there were other ones like the Riddler. And so that rekindled my interest in toy collecting. And that is when toy collecting started coming up again, because I think a lot of guys our age were graduating college or just getting out of college. And
yeah, I remember that second wave of Star Wars figures that were more detailed.
Power of the Force.
Right.
Yeah.
They were more detailed, but they were the same basic size, and they tried to somewhat replicate the original packaging. And that was I remember distinctly. I was working as a security guard right out of college when I'm just trying to get back on my feet, and I was on a site where there were some cops, and they were about my age. And one of them walked up to the other one and handed him a bag, and it looked like a drug deal happening. And I remember thinking, what the fuck? And I then saw him reach into the bag and he pulled out Star Wars figures.
Right.
And so the one cop, I guess, had gone to the store early that morning when they just opened, and it must have been the Tuesday that the next figures were coming out, and got them. And so he was just, and I remember thinking, oh, it's all right again. You know, we can we can do this again. And I had a girlfriend buy me some of those because she actually worked at a retail outlet. I don't remember where. And I never really got into them. I mean, I kind of appreciated them on a nostalgic level, but I didn't continue down that road. But I remember that as being the period where it became clear to me that, yep, adults are going to start openly buying and hoarding and coveting toys.
Yeah. And my thing was that was the thing is I met another guy. I was working at Tower Records at the time. And he was a real big toy collector, but he was buying all new stuff, not vintage stuff. And he was so into the Todd McFarlane Spawn stuff.
Sure.
Like, that was the big thing.
Yeah.
And then he would tell me there were different variations. There's like the hamburger head Spawn was what they called it, that everyone was looking for. It was sort of Spawn with the burnt face without his mask on.
Yeah.
And we'd go out every Friday night after work. We'd go to KB Toys. We'd go to Toys R Us. And we go to the movies. and I remember I was always just looking for, I remember seeing all the Marvel Legends stuff and all that crap. And I wasn't ever really interested in that. I was just looking for the Batman animated series figures and anything monster-wise. If it was monster-wise, I would grab it. And there wasn't a lot. It was a very dry period. But I remember one of the weird things I bought, similar to you buying the Big Boy Caprice, was Waterworld was out at the time. And they had the Dennis Hopper character.
Yep.
And he kind of looked like Dennis Hopper. And I was like, I got to get this because they will never make a figure of Dennis Hopper.
Yeah.
Which, cut to today, there's figures of every person
customs
ever
and things
made.
like
You
that.
know,
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be worth big money. I remember I kept it on the card.
Sure.
And, so, I mean, I didn't have the disposable income that I could buy one to keep and one to keep on the card. But I did buy some of the Power of the Force figures when they came out. I wanted, like, the removable helmet Darth Vader, I thought was cool. Slave Leia. And then, of course, I had to get Grand Moff Tarkin because I had to have a Peter Cushing figure. And I bought him as the 12-inch figure and as the 3 3/4 inch. And I still have both of them. And now I look at it, I'm sort of like, it doesn't even really like look like him. And
Sure.
You know, I've got right there on the shelf, I've got the Mego Van Helsing, Peter Cushing figure, which is the ultimate Peter Cushing to me, like that you can own,
Yeah.
with the candlesticks.
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing too, right? Is like for me when I really started getting excited about collecting again. Well, I wouldn't even say collecting; it's just owning, because, like you said, is that NECA line. When NECA started making all of the the Friday the 13th figures that looked just like the sculpts are fantastic,
Right.
the detail is fantastic, and then you compare it to the things that we really enjoyed as kids. Like my memory of my Steve Austin figure is so much different than the actual sort of. It kind of looks like Lee Majors, right? Because it's big enough so the sculptor could get in there and kind of make it look like Lee Majors. But now, like, just on these microscopic levels, the detail is unreal. And even the Migos now, you can tell that they're trying to almost make them look cheap. Like, they could make them even better looking, but they're trying to capture that old look.
That old look. Yeah.
That kind of flat, sort of cartoonish look. But I really, really enjoy some of this stuff that, like, I'm seeing here in your room that just has so much detail, and it's very satisfying. I know you're a big fan of AHI and things like that. To me, that stuff is just, I think that's childhood. I had a couple of those as a kid,
Right.
But I don't aesthetically appreciate them the way you do.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's something you really appreciate about the very look and paint and.
Yeah, and that's what
that's
makes
personal. I think,
and that's what helps. I think when you're a collector, I don't know. There are people that collect for a variety of different reasons, and of course, none of them are wrong. Collect what you collect for wherever you want to collect it. But to me, it's like what joy does the figure bring you, or what are you trying to get? Like, are you just buying it because you want to make money off of it? That doesn't bring joy to me. Although I fall into that hole every so often. that's the sort of the raging yang side of collecting, is that you fall into this trap, especially when you're in the community, about like, oh, this is going to be worth money, or you need to keep it mint on card, or you're on eBay and you just see, shit, I had that, and I played with it, I played with the shit out of it, and it's ruined, and now somebody's selling it on eBay for $700, and you're like,
Yeah.
you know, but then you lost the joy. Like, to me, it's like, I mean, I just take stuff out of the package now. Still.
Yeah.
I sometimes I appreciate the packaging, but like I said, most of that stuff, that those Batman figures I would buy in the early '90s, I just rip them right off the package, display them. Same with the Migos, unless something has really spectacular graphic design, which I do enjoy on the older stuff. I don't take it off the card. So, say for example, the Super 7 Monsters and Planet of the Apes, the card art is so beautiful on those. It's along the line of like Basil Gogos style artwork, that I just keep those on the card. I mean, they're 3 3/4 inch figures, but I just can't take them off because I enjoy them as a whole piece together.
Right.
But other than that, I take them off. And yeah, the AHI, I got the AHI bug probably about 15 years ago, and now that's something that seems to be very popular because you can't find them for reasonable prices anymore online. I mean, I that's why I would just grab Frankensteins whenever they came up, because they were 30, 40, 50 bucks. You know, if I was paying 75, 80 bucks for a Frankenstein, I was like, ah, crap, I'm overpaying for this. And now they're like $100, $200, $300, you know, crazy money.
Yeah.
And then I started discovering, oh, these look a little different. And then, of course, you're in the collecting community and you see, well, this is the hardhead variant, this is the squinty-eyed variant, this is the, you know, grimacing variant or whatever, and you're like, oh, there's different variations. And then that made it fun, because I pulled them all out, and I'm like, oh, well, what variations do I have? You know, and then that's kind of interesting. It's just little things like that make collecting enjoyable to a certain degree. And some people, they like the mint in package, you keep everything mint in package, and I understand that, because you're keeping it, this is the way you would see it on a store shelf.
Yeah.
And this is the way I'm keeping it, and this is the way I'm enjoying it. And that's good, because I don't think there's a guy I know in the collecting community, he's Johnny Shedrick, mint in box, and everything he buys is mint in box. He keeps it, he has, like, he calls it the museum, and he keeps everything mint in box. But he's not buying stuff for monetary value. He's buying it because he enjoys it, and he likes the aesthetic of the whole piece together.
Yeah.
In the toy in the package, as you'd see it on the store shelf, the complete piece. It's complete to him that way.
Yeah.
And that's cool. That's a, you know, that's what I have no problem with anybody doing it like that. I don't have any problem with anybody collecting for any reason, but sometimes I find these sort of speculators, or the guys that are trying to buy just to make money or earn money, they can kind of, you know, it doesn't make collecting so much fun. Like the comic book community right now is not as good as I'd like it to. Well, it isn't as fun anymore because of graded comics and you know, all these speculators out there.
Right. And I think sometimes there's this, I don't it's a weird situation, because I think when you start looking at collecting as an investment, you're really deluding yourself.
Right.
You're telling yourself, well, this is going to pay for my child's college, when it's like you're just looking for an excuse to spend an exorbitant amount of money. You know, because it's really about bragging rights at the end of the day. It's saying you have this thing. I'm almost certain that 20 years from now, if we even make it that far, you're not going to be selling those comics.
Right.
Or if you, it's something has to give at some point. You've mentioned that before, that sometimes people just put a price on something just to drive the market.
Right.
When it really isn't about the value of the item itself.
Right.
So, but anyway, getting back to the point is, it's like just the minute I start thinking that way, like, oh, well, I can spend this money because it's an investment, I know that I'm just kidding myself. Yeah. I'm looking for a reason to spend the money that, if I need to tell myself that, then I probably shouldn't be doing it. Right.
And that's why it's the old adage is collect what you like. That's it. You know? And then it'll be, and so, for example, you talk about the monetary. I was buying up comic book collections. You were with me when I was doing this. I was answering Craigslist ads, going around. buying boxes and boxes of just old Bronze Age comics because people were getting rid of them. They didn't think anything of them at the time. And I was just trying to complete runs from my childhood. I wanted to complete a whole Tomb of Dracula run. I wanted to complete, Werewolf by Night and things that I enjoyed as a kid. And now, this was prior to the Marvel movies coming out and this whole big explosion. So I collected what I like, and now I have issues that are worth money, but not because I actively sought them out that they were going to be worth money, but it just happened to happen. And that same thing will happen with action figures. I got caught in the bug when Mego came out again, and I was like, oh shit, Mego's coming out again. Who knows how long they're going to be around? I love these. They're monster figures, and I bought like one, I think even when they first came out, I think I bought like 4 Frankensteins, 5 werewolves. You couldn't find them anywhere, so I was just buying them wherever I could grab them. And then I'm like, why do I have 7 Captain Kirks and 9 Spock, whatever, and I'm like, so I think I gave you a ton of them. I opened them up and I just displayed them because, I don't know. For them to be valuable down the road, it's going to be a long, long time. And the packaging's nice on the new Migos. It doesn't have the charm to me of the vintage stuff. I'm always a vintage guy.
Yeah.
There is stuff out there now with great graphic design on it, like I talked about with like Super 7, or even the NECA stuff has some cool designs on it. The Migos stuff's good, but I like to just take it right off the card and slap it up there on the the stand to display it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about if you can find stuff that's mint in box that's vintage is that this thing has traveled through time, right? In that, so you can look at it and you can say, this thing actually was on a Child World peg somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
And back in 1975 or whenever, and you can say it's made it all the way to me.
Right.
Still in this kind of pristine form.
Yeah.
And it is kind of like a way of, I don't mean to make it sound dramatic, but it is kind of like it cheated death somehow. Right? Because most toys of that vintage are in landfill somewhere now. Right? We threw them away as kids. We broke them, whatever. They're buried in someone's backyard. And yet this thing, mint in box, is now in your possession. And there is something quite exciting about that if you are a child of of that time, a monster kid or whatever you want to call it, to actually have an Ursus on card, you know what I mean? It's that's kind of incredible, and I see the value in that. I certainly couldn't, except for maybe 1 or 2 figures, I couldn't imagine spending the money that it would take to get that.
Right. So, for example, I have most of the Star Trek Migos loose.
Yeah.
But I have a good portion of them on card too, because the card art is so beautiful on those cards. I love the graphic design on it. So I like to have here's a loose version that I can display, and here's a version that is, as we would have seen it on the Child World shelves as a kid. And I remember having those and like in my hand, and and that's part of the reason you collect stuff too, and being denied that you can have it. And it's like, now that I'm
the ones that got away,
I can have it. So, what is the first collectible item that you paid a premium price for? That we talked about going to KB Toy and Hobby and stuff. You're just paying retail for that type of stuff, the new stuff then. But what is the first item that you paid a premium on?
It wasn't that long ago. It has to be that, if I'm remembering correctly, it must be that Steve Austin figure.
Yeah.
I think so. And I mean, that's probably within the last 5 or 6 years that I bought that. But then I started losing my mind, and I started spending a lot of money on like sideshow figures, and I just recently spent $200 on a John Rambo, which I really like. I like it, but I mean, what the hell? I mean, I could do so much more with that $200. I mean, I'm not a rich man by any means, but
that's what pops your cherry. Is once you pay a premium on one thing, then you're like, well, I paid that for this.
Yes,
so
exactly.
This is much more, and they're only making 200 of them. Like, it's like.
But like a pair of boots, which I really need, the idea of spending $200 on those sometimes is like, you gotta be crazy.
Russell is wearing grocery bags around his feet tonight, wrapped in rubber bands.
Things you have to do.
Yeah, I did that too. I would say the very first thing I paid a premium price on It was at the Outer Limits in Waltham, Mass, and I was with my friend Ken, who I was talking about, and he had a Batman animated series penguin figure.
Uh-huh.
And the penguin, the myth at the time, the story at the time that was traveling around the toy community was that the penguins, there had been a fire at the factory in Hong Kong, so there was only a very limited amount available. And so they were very hard to find. I don't know if they were, the truth is that they were just short packed or whatever, but you couldn't find the penguin at all.
Yep.
And he wanted $40 for the penguin, and I was like, "Oh my god, $40! That's insane!"
Yeah.
Like, that's especially when I'm living paycheck to paycheck at the time, and so I put it on layaway at the store, and I paid him like a little bit every week or every when I go in there, and I still have it. It's still in the package, and it's probably not even worth $40 right now. But that was the very first thing I bought as a premium.
I guess when you asked the question, I immediately jumped toward an action figure or a toy, but I know there were plenty of times if we're talking about, I can remember being at Tower Records when I was in college, and this is when Laserdiscs came out.
Right.
I didn't even have a Laserdisc player, but I saw that the Laserdiscs had all these special features like commentaries and making of documentaries, and it was the Scorsese collection came out, and there was Raging Bull, and I remember seeing it at Tower Records in Boston. Like I said, I didn't even have a Laserdisc player, but I knew that there was probably one somewhere on campus, and I got so I that was probably the only $100 I had to my name.
Right.
And I got as far as the checkout line, and then talked myself out of it.
Right.
But had I can remember, there would be times where I would spend more money than I could afford, and that's just something that comes to mind. I would buy books over food and things like that. I mean, because that's what I cared about.
Yep. Same here.
But and even now, I'll pay. I've paid ridiculous prices for some movie because it's on DVD that I still haven't even watched.
Yeah.
Because I need to have it.
Well, you're like this. I'll never see it again, or I'll never find it again. And I've been wanting.
And the packaging is just so beautiful, and it's there, and you got this money burning a hole in your pocket sometimes, and you just want that endorphin rush of, it's mine.
Yeah, it's there if I want it.
Yeah.
And then there's crazy things like that I get into too. Like it's where I'm just like, I don't, it's like I said, I did, when they were reasonable, I would buy any AHI figure I came across. I said, well, you already have a Frankenstein. Yeah, but I don't have this one, and this is a little bit different variant. And the same thing with Star Trek Neptunians. Like, if I come across a Star Trek Neptunian and it's a reasonable price, I buy it. Right. So I have like 4 or 5 Neptunians now, maybe 6, because it was such a cool figure. And it was one I had as a kid, and I still have my Neptunian somewhere. And I think that's part of what rekindled some of my collecting too. Was like when my mom moved, she's like, "Oh, there's a bunch of your stuff here. Do you want it?" And there were still boxes of stuff that were my toys as a kid. But through the years and through moves and stuff like that, things dwindled down or got thrown away or tossed. But there was like a few Migos that had survived, a few Marks, Best of the West figures and things along those lines. And seeing those again was like, oh, these are cool, and that they've traveled with me throughout the years. And that made me want to rekindle stuff. And then, of course, discovering eBay was just, you consider it, opening of Pandora's box where you're like, holy shit, now you can find anything. It used to be hunting, shops. And as you go through the years, you discover new things to collect, right? Like, so like I said, we used comic books, then it was Batman, and then it was toys. And in the last 5 or 6 years or so, I've really gotten into, as you well know, old Halloween costumes, like the vintage box costumes, because like you said, it's a miracle that those things survive. They barely would make it through the night when you would go trick-or-treating.
Right.
And everyone I get usually has the crotch blown out of it, or it's torn or it's ripped or whatever. But it's amazing that I can find them in boxes and the masks aren't smashed or whatever. And I think it's like Halloween was such an important holiday to me, and I loved those costumes, and I can remember the hours poring over them, deciding what one to get, because as a kid, you're only given so many Halloweens that you can dress up in those costumes.
Sure.
And I've got more costumes than I would have ever had Halloweens as a kid. And it's just amazing to find them. I love the artwork on them. I love the fact that it's just, here's some obscure character they decided to make a Halloween costume out of. They thought this was going to be the big hit with kids this year, whatever it is. And those ones are some that are even more fascinating to me than some of the others. And just the design that went into it and the way they look. They're like action figures you can dress up as, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I can be, Dark Wolf from Fire and Ice.
Yeah, or you can be Shirley Feeney from Laverne and Shirley, and it all it is just a face with dark hair and lipstick, and I guess that's Cindy Williams that I'm looking at there,
It
Rest
does
in peace.
capture Cindy Williams, yes.
Yeah.
Don't you diss Laverne and Shirley, you son of a bitch. It's like, but I mean, yeah, that's the point though. It's like, how do they like you were talking about Migos, like they do, in a way, capture the essence of the character to a certain degree, or what were they thinking? It's a bunch of 40 or 50-year-old guys deciding, how are we going to design Laverne and Shirley? What research material did they have? Here's a picture from TV Guide, make this. I don't buy comic books as much anymore. I've sort of cooled off on that. Number one, because they're expensive and it's just crazy, but I still get the action figures here and there. There's newer stuff that comes out now too, like that are geared towards us, like NECA and Brent's dolls and distinctive dummies and custom figures, which are cool to get.
Yes,
because they're sort of one of a kind pieces, and the costumes are fun to chase down for me now. Like I love. I mean, I just discovered one this year that I got. I did not think that this thing existed. I could not believe that it was real when I found it. It is a costume. You know the movie Grizzly?
Yeah.
They made a costume. Collegeville made a costume. It's not just a grizzly bear. It is actually for the movie Grizzly.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to tell me it was a Richard Jekyll.
No, that one I would have like a Richard Jekyll or a Christopher George.
Yeah.
Or who's the helicopter pilot?
I know.
From V. I can't think of his name now.
He just died.
He just died. Yeah. I mean, that's the type of stuff where you're just like, holy crap! That like some guy was just like, yeah, make the grizzly bear. It's the poster from Grizzly is on the smock. I'm like, this is amazing. Like,
no, and it's funny too because it's like, you just reminded me a figure that you gave me was the Grizzly Adams figure, and I love it. And I should say, okay, so the thing that started me going, and we talked about this recently, but. The thing that really kind of started me wanting to collect toys from my childhood again was the fact that you found me a thumbs up Fonzie figure in pretty good condition. And when you gave it to me, it looked exactly how I remembered it, or pretty damn close. And I just remember feeling so much joy in having that it was like, okay, I need to now go get, I need to go get my $6 Million Man. I need to get the Star Trek figures. All of my favorite figures.
First taste is free. It's like
yeah, exactly. You're like a drug dealer, and it's.
But that's the thing because like I had known, and it's sort of like that's what the colleague like you. Whenever we would have conversations or talk about this stuff, and. You would say, oh, I had the Mego Fonzie, and I really loved the Mego Fonzie. And one day I'm like, oh, there's a reasonably priced Mego Fonzie. I'll get it and give it to Russell. And that's oh my God, like that's the joy about collecting, or that I like sharing with other collectors. So it's the same thing. Like there's bragging rights, like you like to say, like, hey man, I got all this stuff. But I like the community of collecting to a certain degree too.
Right.
And it can be just as nasty as it can be good. There's a lot of, holier than thou collectors out there, or like you guys, ones that are just sort of like, like comic book guy from The Simpsons, who are just, I know more than you, or you're an ignorant person. But that's how you learn stuff. And I always looked at the collecting community, or anything, comic books, collecting, whatever it is, as sort of this group of like in the old days back in feudal times or the Middle Ages, as these monks that would read these tomes and get the information and write it down and pass it along to other people. So we're all sort of members of this secret society that learn all this information and learn these things and pass it along. Because like I said, prior to the days of the internet, I would read stuff like I can remember I would go to the comic book store every Saturday afternoon. I would grab Toy Fair magazine, Toy Shop magazine, Wizard magazine. I would sit down and I would read that stuff over breakfast and smoke a pack of cigarettes. And then that's how you learned about stuff. And then, of course, when the internet starts happening, you've got sites like Plaid Stallions and a variety of other sites that started putting information out there about stuff and pictures about stuff. More relevant than ever now that you've got social media and all these things online, whereas the community used to be going to conventions or going to shops and hanging around and talking to people that way. Now you can talk to people on the other side of the world about stuff and gather more information and find out about all these things that existed, like European variants of the figures or Australian variants or things along those lines. So all this knowledge gets gathered together and put around, which is kind of interesting. And I think that's part of the reason why, like I said, that we started the Sanctum together. In the early days of COVID, right when the shutdown was happening, when nobody was going out, Russell and I would talk on the phone to each other, and Russell would be like, "Hey, did you get anything good? Anything new that you bought?" Because whenever we would hang out, you look at my comic books, or I'd show him action figures or whatever. And I think I'd gotten some Planet of the Apes figures at that time. He's like, just film them for me and send them over. And I sent them over, and he added some music and sound effects and sort of put it together like a little video. And then we did a couple of others we messed around with, and then we decided, well, why don't we make a YouTube channel? And
we have really good conversations, like when we're on the phone or we're in the car taking a drive out to a record store or something like that. And I've often thought, well, let's find out if there's anyone else out there who kind of feels the way we do and wants to, hear us. like we have such great things to say, I guess. But I think it'd be nice to preserve some of it, and then maybe at some point go in and see if there is a little chestnut that we can maybe turn into something else.
Oh yeah, it's fun to document this stuff and document your thoughts on it. And I go back to older episodes and play stuff, and I can remember when I was shooting it at night, or the conversations we had over different things, or just the different people you meet from putting this stuff out there. Like I said, there's various members of the collecting community that have reached out to me from watching an episode that I've become very good friends with, and that's always fun too. And that's kind of interesting that you can do that. In the old days, I can remember in Fangoria magazine, they had a pen pal section that you could, write to different people. Like they'd be like, "I'm interested in this, that, that." I had pen pals in the back of Fangoria magazine. You write off and on for a month, and then you forget to write a letter, and that'd be it. Your pen pal was gone. But that was the only way to sort of communicate with people. Now you can just comment on someone's Facebook page or, their YouTube channel or whatever.
Yeah, I find that it seems like everything moves, and it's part of just getting older too, but everything seems to move so quickly that there is this desire on my part, at least, to try and document something, to kind of leave something behind where this is what I thought about, this is how I felt. And it's nice that YouTube exists to allow people to, if nothing, I do video projects on my own that are just different than the stuff that you see on Dr. Durant, and it's out there, and I mean, and really it's just a way of archiving it. I don't know if anybody will ever see it, but yeah, so that's really why I want to be able to have these conversations and just keep them so that I can revisit them at some point. Remember a better time, a slower time, because everything's moving so fast.
Yeah, and then there's part of the reason why people possibly collect, right? Is to go back to that time. I think a lot of times you collect stuff from your childhood or your youth because you're trying to get back to that carefree time where you didn't have all these worries in the world, where you could be sitting on your family room rug and playing with these toys, and you got lost in the imagination of the piece of whatever it was you were playing with. Like, the characters from the Planet of the Apes were real characters to me. I would act out scenarios with them. I would play with them for hours. And I mean, I can remember, I would play with them with friends. We'd split up our amigos and we'd have battles with each other. But we'd have really intricate stories. And I can remember just being alone in my room or being at home and just playing with my figures and just really, really enjoying them. Hours and hours of imagination and fun. And I never grew out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, I don't sit there and have, battles with them now, but like there's something about them that gives me that joy or that nostalgia when I see a piece or when I look at a piece or when I hold it. Vintage more so than new, but the new ones are cool too because I'm like, oh wow, this is I can appreciate the artwork that goes into it. It's these are pieces of art, as I've said that before, especially these custom pieces. They're real works of art, and that's art is subjective, and someone may look at it and be like, that's a doll. I'm like, no, it's a doll, but it's a work of art. Some guy sculpted this, painted it, tried to, make Kolchak the Night Stalker, and he did a damn good job out of it.
Yeah. What is your grail right now? Is there a grail piece? Is there something that you are looking at or want that you haven't been able to get?
Yeah,
there's probably many.
There's always grails, right? There's many grails, and that's the thing. It's like the grail is never one thing with a real collector. There's always the next grail, and I mean, you never want to get everything that you want to collect because part of collecting is the hunt, the finding it and being, oh my god, I found it. But for a while, it was the squinty-eyed Frankenstein, the AHI Frankenstein, which I did acquire one. That's him right over there, as a matter of fact. Those of you that are listening, you can't see it, of course. But some of the other ones that I've been looking for, the Ben Cooper Uncle Creepy costume, the Ben Cooper Barnabas Collins costume, the Collegeville Melting Man costume, and those are all, anybody that's a collector of costumes is like, this guy's out of his mind because they're impossible to find. They're very hard to find. They go for higher prices, but you never know. Stuff pops up. I'd love to get my hands on a Halco Phantom of the Opera and a Halco Wolfman that were made back in the early 60s. They were some of the first early licensed Universal Monster costumes. I did get a Halco Frankenstein this year, and that was a real good grail piece to get. There were a few others that I've gotten, and I'll be doing some episodes down the line on some of these grails that I have grabbed or achieved over the years. It's just, it'll never end. I'll die with a room full of things at some point, and my poor family will be like, you hiring a dumpster to get rid of all this stuff. But how about yourself?
Yeah, I don't know that there's really anything vintage. I enjoy having the internet and being able to look something up. Like I was thinking the other day about, I used to have the Emergency One action figures and the paramedic, their little truck, and had some of the SWAT figures. And I don't know if they're grail pieces or not. I don't know how rare or how inexpensive or expensive they would be, but there's always a little something. There's a lot of newer figures that I like that are just so darn expensive. As a matter of fact, I keep looking at the Frazetta Conan through Mezco.
Oh, yes.
He's really, really nice. But as a matter of fact, I think I had him in my cart on eBay last night, and I finally said no. It's just way too expensive, and it's just. But it's nice to know that. I mean, if I do something good, maybe I'll reward myself with something, and that's about it.
Yeah, I like they have a Barry Windsor Smith Conan that's based on the first Conan as he appeared in Marvel Comics. That's kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
That I saw, and I've almost pulled the trigger on him a few times. I mean, as you talk about, like anything Universal Monsters from the 60s, it just really appeals to me. There's the Aurora kits. I love buying them already built and pre-painted and stuff like that. There's some. The Frankenstein Frightling Lightning kit I'd love to get, and the Ideal Monster games. They're cheap games, but they just have great graphics on them.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them so cool. So, I mean, as you're talking, like, more things are registering through my head. Like,
sure.
Yeah. I need this, I need this, I need that. And it's, it'll never end to a certain degree. And there's, as you get older and older, some of this stuff gets rarer and rarer and hard to find. Of course, a lot of the stuff I collect is, it's not like people that collect like Buck Rogers and Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and things like that. That stuff is now cheaper to get because the guys that collected all that stuff are dead, and their collections made it out to the market somewhere, or nobody's into that anymore because who the hell knows who the Lone Ranger is anymore, or any of those old radio stuff. But like monsters are eternal. Like there's always a new generation of people that love to collect monsters, so it never sort of dies down to a certain degree. Star Trek may die down at some point. Who knows? Star Wars, things like that. They have their cycles, like those Power of the Force figures. You can't give those away now. You used to go to conventions and you'd pay top dollar to buy any of those, but people have cases full of them and can't give them away. That's another thing that you and I always talked about, speaking about collecting and how things survived throughout the years. But the fact that there are guys like me or other guys, or even a guy that just used to run a small toy store or a drugstore or something like that, and you would think that in his basement he's got a case of like fresh Migos, whatever, or like a whole case of $6 million Mans, because he just never sold them, and he closed his shop and he just took his stuff and put it in his basement.
Yeah, who knows what's sitting in a storage locker or a basement or an attic of somebody who doesn't know what they have.
Right.
And it isn't until an estate sale happens. If an estate sale happens, maybe it ends up like you said, it ends up in a dumpster somewhere, and the world is all the less rich for it.
Right, and that's how I've seen things come up. You see, I've bought stuff off of people that are just like, oh, I found this in an attic somewhere. I don't know what it's worth, but I'm selling it to you. Like, yeah, great. I know what it's worth, and that's the joy of collecting too. Is some people just like, I just want this to go into somebody's collection that they enjoy it.
Right.
I don't need to get top dollar for it, but I want someone that appreciates this piece to have it. Not like somebody that's like, some sort of fucking guy on the stock market floor who's like, I can flip that for, I'll pay you $10 and I'm going to sell it for $350, and stuff like that. That's the stuff that irks me with collectors. Thanks for joining us. If you want to check out Russell's stuff, you can find him on Neptune Teletron. He's got a Facebook page as well as a YouTube channel. And you can see some of the fantastic work that he and I have done together on that channel, as well as all the work that he's done on his own there. And don't forget to check out Dr. Durant's Sanctum on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Walk in beauty, my friends.
Is that a Reggie Bannister figure over there?
It is.
I've been looking at him the whole time, and I'm like, that looks, wow.
That is Distinctive Dummies.
It's crazy.
He did Reggie, the tall man. I think I've got them all. The Jawa looking dude. And
he did them in this style?
Yeah, mini monster style.
Because, the heads are almost like you could do a full Migo body.
He did. As my friend, I'll go show you. I can just do an outro
Yeah.
on the thing.